In my previous video I finished putting splines in the box. Next I need to put a hardwood face on one side. I just applied glue and now I'm attaching a piece of hardwood to the one side of the box. You can never have enough clamps. While I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I'm making the rails that the box will slide back and forth on. This is cutting the beveled rail that's near the front of the box. That beveled cut makes for a really sharp corner, so I'm just rounding it with a little hand plane. So here's my beveled piece of wood, and to get the screw positions just right, they're not that critical. I'm just going to mark them using my one-to-one drawing. As long as I follow where I have them on here, I know none of them is going to interfere with anything. I'm still waiting for the glue to dry, so the next thing I'm making is the mount for the ball bearing. Now switching to a slightly smaller drill. So I've just created a hole with a ledge in it, and the narrow part of that hole is more than big enough for a nut that's going to go on the threaded rod. And on the wide side of the hole, the bearing fits in, but it only slides so far in because it ends up hitting that ledge in there. Now with the slot cut in there, when the bearing is in here, and I put a couple of screws in here to really squish this together, that bearing really gets locked in place. So now back to working on the stock holding box. So next I need to cut this notch out of here, and I've got the dimensions for it here, and I've just marked on the workpiece where that notch goes. I'm going to make that notch with 2 cuts, and here I'm just checking that for the vertical cut I've got the blade at the right angle and I've already set it to the correct height. Now for the other cut in this notch, this is at 30 degrees, and that means I'd have to tilt the blade by 60 degrees to be able to cut it flat on the table. So what I have to do is put the box upright and then tilt into it from vertical. So that looks like it should just cut away just right. Now this is not the safest cut because the blade will want to pull the stock towards it, which is like this. So just to help me a little bit, I'm going to put a feather board here to hold it, and I'm also going to be very careful to make sure I keep this pressed against the fence while I'm cutting. Well, that fits nicely. It's important for this to glide with a little bit of friction so that the threaded rod and gearing backlash aren't going to affect the accuracy. There's a recess that needs to be cut into this box so that my T-nut mounting block can be further this way, just so that the carriage can come further that way. And for expedience, it's round this way, so I can just carve that out with a table saw. So the T-nut is going to get mounted roughly here, and the threaded rod goes through the T-nut, and that needs to have a place to go. So I need to make a cutout here. Now that cutout doesn't actually need to go all the way to the end, and the last time I cut that with a router. This time I'm just going to cut it with a table saw. So I've made a piece that matches this curve in here because this is just a 5-inch radius and this is a straight line. So now placing that on here and trace the outline of that. And now cutting it out for an exact fit on the bandsaw. Now the T-nut is supposed to go 1.9 from the end and 1.6 from the bottom. So right about here. So I've just drilled some holes in there for the prongs on the T-nut, and that way I can get in there without damaging the plywood. So I'm just going to add a few more screws to this thing to hold that T-nut in place so it can't pull out when I rewind the carriage. So the next thing I need to make is the base for this, and I've already cut out a piece of plywood to match that shape, and I want to put that under here so I can punch all the screw hole positions through. And to do that, I'm going to cut this out so I can place it neatly on top and then punch through. So I just drill these holes through and then countersink them from the other side. And now I'm ready to put this rail in place. It's flush on this side, and it's 12 millimeters from the edge all along. And I'm just going to clamp that on. Next I can put this piece in place, and I'm going to make sure that it's on there square and in the right place. And now let's clamp that. Now because the piece I'm just adding is hardwood, I have to pre-drill for this screw. And finally we get to put this rail on. Now I'm going to clamp it on one side, and now I have to measure very carefully to make sure it's going to be parallel. That's the most important part. I'm drilling the screw holes for the corners through both parts at the same time. That way alignment isn't that critical. I put 2 screws in here as well. The tricky thing with those is they have to be far enough down so that they're well below this gap. We don't want to screw into this gap or into the upper part, because that would interfere with the clamping function for the bearing. Now let's put this beveled rail on here. Now I can slide this box in, and I need to make sure it mounts so that this part here is exactly vertical. And this block as a spacer happens to lift it just the right height so that this is now vertical against the base. And now I need to mark on here a rabbet for this bar to fit into. So I'm just going to use a hand plane blade and mark the bottom edge that I need, and more importantly the top edge. This rabbet needs to be a little bit wider than the rail just so it doesn't get stuck. So this is going to be where the top edge needs to be. Another really important check is that this slot here, which is going to be for the threaded rod, is going to line up with this hole here, and it looks like it does. So the next thing I did is I cut out a dado where I previously marked that it should go, and rather than put a dado blade in my table saw, I just moved my fence 2 millimeters at a time and made a series of cuts to cut out the width of the slot. So here's my slot cutout, and this bar here is going to ride in here, and I deliberately made that a little bit large. It's just going to ride on the top edge, and if we have a little bit of a gap down there, that means it's never going to jam up. On the previous one I built, I left it a little bit too tight and it ended up jamming a little bit.